Have you ever wondered why some of the best, most entertaining, and effective educators on this planet don't just sit up there and recite tutorials? Have you ever wondered why some of the best educational content is not done in the form of tutorials? And have you ever realized that the best-selling books are never done in a step-by-step tutorial-based format? There are ways to teach, there are ways to educate, and there are ways to even do how-to tutorials that are engaging, powerful, and effective. Today's episode is dedicated to teaching you educational persuasion and introducing you to this concept so you'll never have to create a boring educational piece of content again. We're going to show you how to build rapport, have profitable messaging when it comes in the form of education, how to pull people in, and create educational content that also creates demand. Get ready. This is going to be a good one. Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Today we're doing a little night session, for those of you watching on YouTube, you probably see some harsh shadows on my face, but you know what? It's nighttime. The lighting is a little weird in this office right now, and I don't really want to fix it. So, so if you're watching on YouTube, that explains the harsh shadows on my face. But I'm really excited for today's episode. I don't know where totally it's going to go, and I don't know how long it's going to be. It could be short. It could be 2 hours. Who knows? But we're going to talk about this concept that I think a lot of people miss. And so the biggest, and I've been talking about this for a really long time. So if you've been in my circle for a while, you're kind of like, okay, Brandon, we get it. But one of the biggest things that I take a stand against is this idea that just giving your best stuff away for free is what's going to build your business online. And doing all how-to content and tutorial-based content is what's going to build our business online. I just don't think it does anymore. Give it 5-10 years ago, or given 5-10 years ago. Yeah, it did. And that's how I grew my business 5-10 years ago. And I will say that, my little disclaimer here, I will say there are people that can build a business doing all how-to content. There are some businesses, but I know that for 95% of the people who are trying to build a business online right now, doing it 100% of the time just doesn't work. And so we have to look at starting to do things a little bit differently. We have to look at what are most people doing that are really taking off right now. And I will do one more little disclaimer here, is that I do believe we still need to do how-to content and educational content. And I do think you need to add a lot of value. That's a given. Like, we still need to do that stuff. Where we run into a problem is when that becomes 100% of what we do. It becomes 100% of how we communicate. And it's not even 100%, like 70%, or even sometimes even 60%. If it's like what you're doing the majority of the time, you're just going to have a really hard time building a business online. And if you're listening to this podcast and you've been stuck, you've been plateaued, then I'm willing to bet you've been experiencing the problems of doing a ton of how-to content, or you've been experiencing the problems of not knowing what to say and how to say it in order to grow. And there has been a shift in the past 12 months. And if you're listening to this podcast and you're someone who has experienced a plateau in sales, or or even a decline, like your webinars are becoming less effective, your challenges are becoming less effective, or even if you're doing stuff that was working 2 years ago, but just over the last 6 to 12 months, it hasn't become as effective. It's kind of losing its steam. Well, you got to start doing something a little bit differently. And what we've realized after working with so many people is that messaging really is the foundation. It is the foundation that makes everything work. What we have realized is that when you come to us, we make all those courses that you bought, that didn't work for you, we make them work. When you have a strategy, or you've tried 5 strategies that don't work, guess what we do? We make them work for you. Why? Because we change the way in which you communicate. And so what we have realized over the years is that although messaging should be the foundation because it's what's going to make that course work, it's going to make that strategy work, it's how you communicate. It should be the first thing you go to. We've realized that we're actually like the second or third step for people. When people run into problems or plateaus, or they're not getting the traction they want, or they're not getting the shares or the view time they want, they come to us after they tried a couple different things until they're like finally convinced, okay, it's the way I'm communicating. I mean, just even in talking to some students and people over the last couple of weeks, I've had some personal conversations with people. It's just kind of crazy the amount of things that people think are causing their plateaus in their business. I mean, everything from like, I need to hire a team to the strategy that I just need to throw more money at strategy, or I need to throw more money at ads, not understanding that hiring more teams not going to fix your sales plateau. Sorry, but hiring another team member isn't going to fix the problem you have, which is conversions, converting, getting people to automatically want what you have. Automatically throwing money into more strategy or more ads doesn't guarantee that you're going to all of a sudden grow, because what other people also don't realize is that messaging in your communication is different when it's at scale. And here's the reason why. When you move into ads and you move into paid traffic, you're moving your audience or the people seeing your message from mostly warm to almost all cold. And so the message that was working with your warm audience may not work as well to cold traffic. And a lot of people don't realize that. And so where I'm going with this is that I want to introduce you guys to a concept today on this podcast episode called educational persuasion. And the reason why this is so important is because I believe that we don't want to do all how to and do that all the time. And I believe that messaging is the thing that will pull you out of almost any slump. The positioning that you have, the messaging that you have, the communication that you have, the headlines on your things, all of that stuff is what's going to pull you out. It's literally what leads to conversions. It leads to attention. It leads to conversions. And education is a big piece of that. Okay. So now there's a ton of different elements. And over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking more and more about the different elements and things like that you're going to need. But I want to talk about the education element here today. And the reason why I want to talk about it here today is because I think a lot of people hear me with my message and they think, okay, we don't need to do tutorials. We don't need to do educational content. It's like, no, hold on. I didn't say not to do it. I just said don't do it 100 or 70% of the time. So that begs the question, like, well, how much do we do? And what do we do? And I want to introduce you guys to this idea that education doesn't have to mean tutorial. And I think that's the other thing. People don't understand that educational content doesn't have to be done in the how-to format. It doesn't need to be done in step 1, step 2, step 3. And again, when you look at all the big people in the space, or best-selling books, or best like TED Talks, very educational, almost mind-blowing, very inspiring as well, but they're almost never done in the form of tutorials. Never. Again, we still need tutorials. Don't get me wrong. We still need them. But let's just say that I recommend, and I do recommend everyone start at this place where 50% of your content is educational. So when 50% of your content is educational, we need to look at how much of that 50% of that educational content is done in tutorials. And I think 25% maximum, or no, not maximum, but I think half of your educational content, which is half of your overall content, so maybe 25% of your content should be done in the form of like traditional how-to tutorials. So what do we do for the other sort of educational content? Well, we'll talk about that as well. But what I want to dive into is that if you're going to do a tutorial, I want to give you guys some steps and tips and tricks to make tutorials really, really persuasive. Okay. So let me just give you an overview of what I recommend most of your content looking like. I think you should be doing about 25% thought reversals, 25% connection, 25% educational content that is not tutorials, and 25% of content that is educational and in the form of tutorials. So when we look at educational content that is not done in the form of tutorials, we have so many different ways. I mean, we have a ton of different ways inside of our program, New Generation Mastery, to do it. But like, just to help you spark some ideas, mistakes videos are really popular. 5 mistakes to avoid. If you're trying to create engaging content, titles like that, I think would do really well. We love reviewing stuff. So I like, or breakdown videos. Like I love breaking down like Simon Sinek's videos or his books or whatever as educational content as well, which is, again, it's very engaging. It's not boring. It has great titles like, breakdown of Simon Sinek's 5 million viewed video or something like that, or best-selling book or something. They're like very catchy titles and you stand out really quick. And they're educational. They're also entertaining. So when it comes to tutorials and using persuasive education, there's a couple rules that I want to run you through. And number one is that we have to first and foremost understand that value does not mean giving out great information. Giving out great information is great in some scenarios, but the example I always use goes back to my track days and cross country days, the days where I was running in high school and college and all of that stuff. And for a lot of people, you guys may have heard me talk about this before, but a lot of people don't realize that when you run track or even cross country, when you go to train, you wear trainers. You wear like thick shoes that have a lot of padding in them, that have a lot of support in them. Maybe you pronate or whatever, which is a way your heel strikes the ground. There's going to be a different type of shoe for that. So there's different trainers because you're going to run most of your miles in these shoes. So you want to protect your body. Well, trainers are typically going to be bigger shoes, more support, more padding. They're going to be heavier. We don't want to race in those shoes. Even if you're running a marathon, you're going to train in trainers for a marathon. But when you get to a marathon, you're still going to run in a racing shoe. In track, they call them spikes. So you run in spikes. It's a very lightweight shoe. They have little spikes on the bottom of them. In cross country, it's a very similar thing. They call them flats. It's a very lightweight shoe, not a lot of support. But most people don't realize is that the difference between wearing a trainer and wearing a flat or a spike in a mile race is about 10 seconds. So if I go to race in trainers, and that's what I did as a freshman. As a freshman, I had no idea what I was doing. I got cut from the baseball team. So I was like, I might as well go out for track because I was always like top in my PE classes in junior high and stuff like that. I was like middle of the pack JV as a freshman. And then halfway through the year, I just kind of like took off and I was just winning all the JV races and all of that stuff. And then won like the league meet and as in JV level. And I ended up running 4:51 as a freshman in the mile. And my coach at the very last race goes, have you been running and racing all season in those shoes? And I said, yeah. And he goes, oh my gosh, we need to get you spikes. He's like, I can't believe you won the league in those trainers. And so we got to get you spikes. But had I run in spikes, my time could have been closer to like 4:40 or 4:41 as a freshman, which is really good. I mean, 4:51 is good too, but that would have been pretty phenomenal. So the reason why I bring all of this up is to show you guys this idea or make you aware of this thing going on in track, right? So if you race in trainers, you're basically adding 10 seconds onto your time. So the reason why I tell you all this is for this scenario here. If someone came to me and they were running like 5:10, 5:11, 5:09, and they're like, Brandon, I cannot break the 5-minute mile. I've been running race after race after race. Just can't do it. I can't get underneath like 5:09, 5:10. What do I need to do to break that 5-minute mile? I mean, I could give them 1.5 million things to do. I could give them a new training plan, a new diet plan, a new stretching plan, cross training plan. There's so many things that I could do. And if I gave them those plans, they would have to go execute on that plan, meaning they would need to take time, put more energy into it, and they would need to go work really hard, and then eventually they could break the 5-minute mile. But if I look down and notice that they were running in trainers, all I have to do is tell them, you know what, don't worry about a training plan. Don't worry about the new diet plan. Do exactly what you've been doing, but let's take off those trainers. Let's stop wearing those trainers and let's wear spikes. They don't have to do anything. In fact, they can stop doing stuff and they get to now have a chance at breaking the 5-minute mile. And again, I added value to them, not by giving them instructions of what to go do, but I allowed them to save energy because now they don't have to go do all that stuff. And I'm getting them faster results. Why? Because they don't have to spend months training. They literally just swap their shoes out. Very next race, bam, they can break the 5-minute mile. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because making someone aware of these things is incredibly value adding. And the problem is that so many course creators and online business owners, they actually start by just delivering information. Let me tell you what to do. 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 And it's like, hello. Sometimes telling people what to stop doing is the thing that's going to get them the results. And it can get them results so much faster. But here's the thing. You have to understand, if your audience is making that mistake, your audience is making some sort of mistake that's causing the problem in their life, they're not aware they're making a mistake. Otherwise, they wouldn't be freaking doing it. So what happens is when you make them aware, you get a mind-blowing moment. There's an experience where they get their awareness raised, and raising your awareness is everything. It's everything in life. The more aware and self-aware that you become, the better off you're going to be. And in case with your audience, the more aware they become of the things they're doing that are causing the problems they're experiencing, the better off they're going to be. And on top of that, if they don't stop making those mistakes and you tell them what to go do, it's still going to make it harder and almost sometimes impossible for them to ever get the result. For example, if someone right now was like trying to grow their business and they said, Brandon, I need to know how to grow my sales. And I looked at their business and I'm looking, why are they not growing their sales? And I realized, they're spending 80% of their time like hiring people, posting social media content they don't really need to post. And I just go, and I don't make them aware of that. And I just continue to let them spend 80% of their time on that. And then I say, here's what you need to do. Focus on your messaging, run this ad, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And they're still doing all that crap they were doing before that wasn't moving the needle. Guess what? All that advice I gave them, the likelihood of that advice actually getting them results goes into the toilet because they're still making all of those mistakes. And so we have to start focusing our content, our messaging, our communication, our sales mechanisms, our webinars on these topics first. In fact, we just wrapped up our very first workshop with our NGM Plus students where we spent 2 days designing their webinars, going through their ads, going through their messaging, going through their headlines, going through their copy, like literally sitting down with them and going through it all. That is a major part of what we designed with them in their webinar is identifying what these things are. How do we make your audience aware of them? How do we, quote unquote, diagnose them so that they know they're making these mistakes? And then how do we then move into, and then also we throw in thought reversals, and then how do we then move into the what to do section? Okay. So the first thing we want you guys to realize is that removing mistakes inside of your educational content is very persuasive. It's very mind-blowing. It's not boring because you're raising their awareness. So the second thing that we have to understand is that even when we're teaching and we're going through the steps, we still want to build rapport and we want to demonstrate that we understand their specific and unique situation. So what this means is that if you, let me give you guys another scenario here. If you're, I'll use my scenario. When I was in college, I kind of give you a little bit of a backstory here, but so I finished 10th in the state meet in California, in cross country. So the 10th fastest runner in the state of California, and California is like the number one most competitive state in the country. I think Texas is number 1 or 2. They switch off, but it's like top 10 in California is probably, I think, top 40, top 50 in the United States. So it's a pretty decent runner. And going into UC Irvine as a freshman, I was positioned to be like the number 1, 2, or 3 runner. I ended up breaking my back up at camp in Mammoth. We went through Hell Week up in Mammoth, and just tough runs. Just like, I mean, we were just hammering some of these runs. I mean, we were doing like 8, 10, 15 mile runs, at like 5:10, 5:15, 5:20 pace, just up at elevation. I mean, we were just hammering these runs. And so, after a week of that, your body's just, I mean, it's just destroyed. And so, this is before the season. And so in order to celebrate, we hiked up to this lake called Crystal Lake up in Mammoth. And that was pretty tough in itself, like going through Hell Week and then having to climb up this mountain to celebrate was maybe not the most best idea, but whatever, we did it. That's just how runners are. Runners are a little crazy, because everything you do is painful and you just wake up and you do it again the next day. So anyways, we get up to the lake and there's this cliff, and this cliff, started off at the very south end of the lake, where you come up and you hike up to the south end. It had a very small cliff, but this cliff got bigger the more north to the lake that you went. So on the opposite end of the lake, the cliff was maybe 90 or so feet. And over the summer, I had been doing a ton of cliff jumping and jumping off bridges into the ocean and things like that with my friends. And, you know, we were jumping off things that were like 40 or 50 feet. So I remember going up and I'm going thinking like, I don't want to jump off this 10-foot cliff. I'm going to go up to the tallest point to go check it out. So I walk all the way up to the tallest point, and I look over the edge, and there is the cliff kind of goes down, and then it comes out a little bit, and then it goes down again. So there's almost like this little shelf on it. And I look down, and I remember thinking, this is big. This is bigger than anything I've jumped off of before, but it doesn't look much bigger. Well, the thing is, it was like double the size of anything I'd done before. It was like 90 feet. And what happens is you just kind of lose all depth perception when you're looking straight down. So I didn't really realize it. And I remember thinking, well, you could hit the shelf. And I remember thinking, well, if you run and you jump far enough, you won't hit the cliff. And I'm like, okay, cool, I got this. So I run, I jump, I'm falling. And I remember thinking, I'm going to hit the shelf. I'm going to hit the cliff. Great. And so I try to move myself in the middle of the air. So I'm like moving myself, like flailing my arms, like almost like I'm, swimming or something like that, trying to move myself away from the cliff. And I end up knocking myself off balance in the middle of the air. And I land in the sitting position, almost like I was sitting in a chair. So all that impact went straight up my back. I don't remember the last half of the fall. I don't remember hitting the water. I don't remember coming up out of the water. So I just remember thinking, I'm going to hit the cliff. And then my next memory is I'm already above the water. So I'm assuming that, that was a very traumatic experience. So my mind kind of blocked it out because I don't remember the fall. I don't remember hitting the water. I don't remember going down into the water or coming back up. But I remember thinking, okay, your back is messed up. You really messed up your back. And I'm moaning uncontrollably. And I was too afraid to move my legs. I was too afraid to see if I was paralyzed. And I remember sitting in the water and all the teams running around the lake because I was on the opposite end, and some of them were swimming out to me because I couldn't really swim. And I knew my back was messed up, and the water was like ice melt. So it was really cold, which probably helped. And I remember just keeping myself afloat using my arms, but I did not want to move my legs. And I remember thinking, you could be paralyzed, you could be paralyzed, you could be paralyzed. And so I remember leaning back in the water and seeing my toes pop up out of the water because I was leaning back, so my legs kind of floated up to the top, and seeing my toes. And I remember closing my eyes and thinking, okay, you need to wiggle your toes. And I remember wiggling my toes, but my eyes were closed. And I remember thinking, okay, your toes are wiggling, but they might not be actually wiggling and you just think they are. And so it took me a couple minutes to finally build up the courage to open my eyes. And I remember opening up my eyes and seeing my toes wiggle. And I'm like, okay, nothing else matters. Like, you're good. And so they ended up bringing me out of the lake and putting me on a stretcher. They couldn't helicopter me out because there was a plane crash in Mammoth that week or that day or something like that. So the helicopter was preoccupied. And so the fire department had to come up with this off-roading gurney thing. And they took them 2 hours or 3 hours to get up there, a couple hours to get me off the mountain, and ended up going home. And I was never the same runner after that. So I came back, I started walking and then jogging, race walking almost, and then jogging and then racing. And then within a year, I was back racing Division I NCAA again, but I was never the same runner. Instead of being like number 1, 2, or 3, I was like 5, 6, 7 on the traveling team. And so, I don't even know how I got onto this topic. I think it was because I was telling you about the whole diagnosing thing with the doctor. So what ended up happening is I kept racing for a couple more years, but then moving into my junior year, something weird started happening. I started running and I started feeling like my cardiovascular, my breathing felt totally fine. So we would be doing these racing workouts, these, they call them like, intervals or fartleks. And so basically what it is you do like, high bursts of speed for a certain amount of time. So maybe it's like a lap or 2 laps and you're working on your speed. So the idea here is to maintain a very fast pace for a certain amount of time to just work on your speed workout. So that's the style of workout. And then you have your endurance workouts and things like that. Well, the speed workouts are usually pretty painful because you're like maxing out your heart rate. You're like going as hard as you can for a quarter mile, half mile, 3/4 mile, or a mile, or whatever it is. And we would blast these. I remember doing mile repeats and we're doing like 4:30, 4:35, 4:31 over and over and over again, just like blasting these mile workouts. But then something weird started to happen where I would be doing these repeats and my cardiovascular was fine. It wasn't painful, but I couldn't move my legs any faster than they were going. So it's almost like a dream. You don't want to dream when you can just like you're being chased by something, but you can't move. It was like that. It was like I had cement blocks in my leg and I had no idea what was going on. So we'd go to one doctor and I had no idea what the issue was. Went to another doctor and they did all the tests, all the MRIs, all the x-rays, all the everything. No one knew what it was. And then finally we went to one doctor and that one doctor started to perfectly describe my situation. He goes, do you just feel really tired? Like a huge, like big, do you just feel tired way more often? And it's like a deep tiredness that you've never really felt before. I was like, yeah. And he goes, have you noticed that like when you're running or doing something active that your energy is very low and you just can't seem to, no matter how hard you try to bring in more energy? I'm like, yeah. And he just started going through all these things. And I'm like, oh my God, that's me. And I found myself in that time wondering or wanting him to be like, just you know what I have, you know what's wrong with me. Just tell me, stop going through all these problems that I have. Stop going through all these symptoms that I have. Tell me what I have. And he goes, you have Lyme disease. And he's like, I think we should test you for it. And so we got tested and sure enough, boom, I had Lyme disease. And in that moment, I realized I don't want to go to any other doctor. I want to go to this doctor. I want to go to the doctor that knew exactly what I had because my subconscious is like assuming he knows exactly what I have. And so I started to look through this from the lens of a marketing perspective. And I started to understand how value adding that actually was. To know that doctor knew when no other doctor knew what was wrong with me or what the problem was or why I'm stuck. That doctor knew exactly what was going on with me. It felt reassuring. It felt like, okay, I have hope. There's an out here. I now know what to fix. I can come up with a plan. And I now know what I have. And I think most people miss this inside of their webinars, inside of their sales mechanisms, their messaging, and especially their educational content, is that we want to build some sort of rapport. We want our audience to feel like, wow, this person really understands me. So if I'm doing a video and I title it How to Create Engaging Content, people click on it, I can give them the steps and great, they're going to move on. But if I take some time to build this rapport, to get them to a place of before I even release a step where it gets them to go like, oh my God, this person just understands specifically what I'm going through. What you're doing is you're demonstrating an understanding of someone's specific situation, which means your relevancy goes way up. You become hyper relevant to them and their specific situation, which builds this subconscious rapport and trust and likability. And people always tell you, hey, build a know, like, and trust, but no one actually tells you how. Well, I'm telling you how. This is one way. There's a lot of different ways to do it, and we talk about it inside our program, but there's one way right now that you guys can do that. And it could be as simple as just listing some mistakes and problems. For example, if I did a video titled How to Create Engaging Content, and I said step 1 is coming up with a really effective title, I could say something like, Okay, guys, here's step one. It's coming up with a really effective title. Now, the problem is when you don't have effective titles, you have gold for your content, but no one really seems to understand that. You feel unheard and you feel really proud of it. And you're just so confused because you know you can help people and no one's coming through. And it's all because of your title. Now, some of the mistakes people make to fix that is they just randomly change their titles. They focus a lot on keywords, or they just try to be polarizing with no intention of what it's really doing when you're polarizing. Now, if you guys want to learn how to create titles, here's what you do. And then I move into the steps. So the reason why that's important is because if I can demonstrate the problems or the symptoms you have when it comes to titles, I start listing the mistakes you're making, and I now am making you aware. So hopefully you guys are seeing how this is coming together. I talked about awareness and I talked about problems. When you talk about problems and then why they exist, the mistakes, you're raising awareness, but you're also demonstrating and building a subconscious rapport, but demonstrating that you understand someone's unique situation. And this is what educational persuasion is. Like, don't just say something and then teach it. Be intentional with what you're doing, okay? So the next phase of that is after I get done teaching them that step, you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to move on to step number 2. I'm going to back up what I just taught. So if I just taught you how to create an effective title, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out and I'm going to find people that have 1 million views on their videos that titled it the exact way that I just taught you. These are called counterexamples. So what I would do is say, cool, that's how you, that's step 1. That's creating an effective title. Here's a video from Gary Vaynerchuk, who has 10 million views on this video. And look, he titled the video the exact way I just described it to you. Look at Brené Brown videos here, who has 15 million views, and Simon Sinek's. They both titled their videos the exact same way I just taught you. So now what this does is on the subconscious level, people understand and see that it actually works. So it's almost like social proof. You don't want to use your own case studies. You want to use third-party examples here. But the thing that also is happening is it helps people integrate your teachings. So one of the biggest problems is that if people can't integrate your teachings, or they can't take your teachings and see how it is relevant to their specific business, they're not going to listen to you. They're not going to follow you. So when you use a counterexample, they see your teachings live in action, and it becomes easier for them to now integrate it into their own life, into their own business. So it has multiple benefits. Now, the next thing we can do is we can also add in metaphors. So the easiest way to find a metaphor is to look at like what you're really teaching and go high level or generalized with it, and then look for that in a different context. So let me give you an example of what I mean. When I say that how-to content isn't how to grow a business online, I have to ask myself, what am I really saying? And what I'm really saying is that information doesn't mean more results. And I have to ask myself, okay, where else does information not equal more results? And I go, oh, books. An encyclopedia filled with great information does not hit the bestsellers list. The best-selling books are doing thought reversals and all this other stuff. So what I did is I took my statement that I'm teaching. I asked myself, what am I really doing here at a high level? And then I find that concept in a different context. And now I have my metaphor or analogy. And so anytime I teach, I usually follow up with metaphor or analogy or a story. I use all 3 of those. I never teach something and move on. In fact, this podcast episode you guys are listening to has been infested with story. It's been infested with counterexamples. It's been infested with metaphors. Why? Because that's how I teach. It's called educational persuasion. It keeps people engaged. It keeps them entertained. It keeps them teaching. It blows their mind. And this is what educational persuasion needs to be. So this idea that, and by the way, this can all be done in a tutorial. So if I did a how-to video on how to create engaging content, that was step 1. Step 1 is create an effective title. Here's the problems you're going to face if your titles are messed up. Here's the mistakes you're probably making. Let me teach it to you. Let me give you a counterexample. Okay, let's move on to step number 2. Step number 2 of engaging content is blah, blah, blah. And I just follow that same process all the way through. If you're an NGM student, we have this whole process broken down for you inside NGM. If you're an NGM Plus student, you better sure as heck know this concept, because we just spent 2 days going through it with you inside of your ads and webinars. But this is kind of a little intro into educational persuasion and getting your mind to start thinking outside the box when it comes to educational content, because we still need educational content, which should be 50% of your content to start out with. 25 or 50% of that educational content should be done in tutorials, and all of your tutorials should be done in the persuasive tutorial format. They should be done using the things that I'm talking to you about today, so that when you do a tutorial, it's not some boring tutorial that someone reads or listens to and then moves on. They go like, I never thought of it that way. I totally see how this works. I'm getting excited. This person understands me. This tutorial is relevant to me. And by the way, they make all of those decisions automatically, subconsciously, without using any logic. If you do this correctly, that response should be automated when they listen to you talk. And again, this is why our ads work. This is why our ads scale. This is why we're able to do 7-figure webinars. We're able to do 7-figure launches. We navigated and scaled into a multi-7-figure business relatively quickly, all because of this sort of communication. And by the way, guys, just so you know, over the last couple of years, I've used a webinar. I've used a live 3-day workshop. We've used video series. We've used emails direct to sale and application. We've used so many different strategies, and they all worked. All strategies work. If they don't work, it's because your messaging is broken. It's your communication within the strategy that is broken. So if you want help fixing that, send me a DM. Let me know. Depending on when you're listening to this, we may have a launch coming up, but we also have open enrollment and some spots in programs. And so if you ever get to the point where you're like, I need help with this, Brandon, just send us a DM. Enough is enough. Come on, guys. Enough is enough. So yeah, that's it for this episode. Hopefully this was value adding. If you enjoyed this episode, let me know, share it, tag us in it. And if you haven't, please leave us a review on iTunes. I always love reading those reviews. And honestly, it just brings me a ton of joy to read it, and helps us just get more exposure. And so I would appreciate that if you have the time and you've found value in today's podcast episode. So head over there, leave us a review, and I will talk to you guys on the next episode. Take care, everyone. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested, and thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.